Hello, my name is Mutian Wang. I'm a high school student at Capital Normal University High School in China. Today, I'll present my research on the positive economic influence of subsidized housing in the US and China. With the fast economic development, big cities attract more and more people. On the one hand, the big city means more opportunities. On the other hand, the big city also means high housing prices. Subsidized housing construction is a practical way to solve this challenge. The subsidized housing policy is one of the main policies to solve the housing problem for low-income populations worldwide. While both in the US and China, subsidized housing policy remains more of a political level, and its positive economic impact is less visible. Why so? First, building subsidized housing needs a large amount of investment. Second, because the policy proposed by the central government is relatively general and usually does not come along with specific measures. Local governments are unwilling to follow it due to the significant short-term financial burden as expected. This study aims to eliminate concerns and boost local governments' willingness to promote and implement subsidized housing policy to achieve satisfaction from both the low-income people and the local government, making the economy of more regions more dynamic and favorable in the short and long term. Literature research and case study are based on the following resources: government websites, the National Bureau of Statistics database, relevant documents published by other relevant, reliable scholars, media content due to the lack of official database in some areas. My research focuses on the short-term and long-term positive labor market impact of subsidized housing policy in the US, a case study of the Beijing Subsidized Housing Project, perspective on China's future subsidized housing policy and practice. First, let's talk about the US subsidized housing policy's economic benefit of labor employment in the economy. Building subsidized housing generates jobs, not only during construction, but also through new spending once the dwellings are occupied. The money spent on materials, labor, and other expenses in building affordable housing brings immediate economic benefits to the community. At the same time, the possibility that construction crews, glass makers, and gardeners will spend part of their money at the neighboring supermarkets or shopping centers is another way that induced effects are established. Thus, building subsidized housing will cause ripple or multiplier effects. The National Association of Home Builders Studies result on developing 100-unit low-income housing tax credit complex for families and seniors in a typical metropolitan area is also solid supporting evidence. While compared with the national average, we are glad to see that jobs are dramatically increased. There is no difference between market rate apartments and family LIHTC complexes regarding the number of jobs created during and after the construction of a 100-unit multifamily property. And the job varieties that subsidized housing construction has provided. Here are more examples of how much influence subsidized housing could have on jobs and GDP in localities. Rhode Island. The indirect and induced effects of these housing bounds resulted in nearly $400 million in new economic activity in the state. In this economic activity, affordable housing investments created or sustained 3,060 jobs and paid $149 million in wages. Minnesota, between May 2006 and May 2008, investment in subsidized housing projects gave a total economic output of about $1.4 billion. This economic activity has sustained nearly 10,700 jobs in Minnesota over the past 2 years. Similar situations in Pennsylvania state, Hope 6 sites across the US, 10 large metropolitan areas. A study of housing needs of workers in St. Paul and Minneapolis focused instead on the economic impact working families could have on the area if subsidized housing were available for workers to rent or buy. The author estimates the area's unmet requirement for worker housing to be 5,000 units, which will need to be built. If these apartments were built, they would offer working families that are now unable to relocate their housing choices. According to the author's calculations, the region loses $128 million in consumer spending, and local businesses lose $137 million in revenue each year because of job vacancies. This is because there isn't enough affordable housing available for these potential households. They do this by relying on a few basic presumptions regarding the number of employees in each family, the wage each worker would make from neighborhood businesses, and the amount of money each worker would spend locally. Then, let's move on to China's subsidized housing policy and its economic effects. When the government constructed those, so I'm going to do a case study in Yuanyang Qinshanshui public rental housing in Beijing indicates that when the government constructed those public rental housing, they hired many building workers, providing locals with thousands of jobs. Besides, they bought large quantities of building materials, including steel, concrete, and glass, promoting the development of secondary industry and providing plenty of jobs in Shijingshan district's traditional construction material factory. Due to the population provided by public rental housing, the secondary industry in the region has grown prominently, increasing by 15% from 2012 to 2016. Beijing Taiwan-themed cultural commercial street near Yuanyang Qinshanshui public rental housing is one of the local leading entertainment places. With the infusion of the new labor, more kinds of restaurants, coffee shops, and fashion bakeries are on the streets. As business thrive, more people move here, providing more demand. In turn, more enterprises are attracted to invest, set up various kinds of business, thus providing more jobs for locals. With the virtuous growth in the labor market, the annual GDP of Shijingshan district increased continually for 5 consecutive years, both in tertiary and secondary industries. Due to the population provided by the public rental housing and its geographic location, the tertiary industry in the region has grown significantly, increasing by 60% from 2012 to 2016. Combining the literature research and case study in the US and China, we conclude that the implementation of subsidized housing significantly increases employment and spending in the surrounding secondary and tertiary economies in both China and the US in the short term or long term. Given that the subsidized housing policy have a significant positive effect on economic growth and social stability, local and central governments of either developed or developing countries should promote the implementation of subsidized housing policies. There's still a significant unmet need for low-rent housing in China and the United States. How to better balance the relationship between local land finance and the construction of low-rent housing, how to define low-rent households more accurately, the problems existing in low-rent housing communities and corresponding solutions, and how to better solve the financial burden problem of the middle class buying a house in big cities will be the focus of our future research. Thank you.